Everyone across the world and in Durban. We are live with Dr. Siphiwo Mahala at the 26th time of the writer, and where I will be discussing Can Themba, the making and breaking of the Intellectual Tsotsi, a biography. My name is Zukiswa Wanner. Siphiwo, how are you? Welcome.
I'm good. I was shocked. You called me Dr. Siphiwo Mahala.
Well, I actually wanted to highlight that I've been talking to doctors because before you I was having a chat with Dr. Siphiwo Mahala. So I suppose
another
now,
Dr. NSM.
But I suppose now I'm lowering down. Next, I might be talking to somebody with an honorary doctorate at the stage. But welcome to Durban.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, we've been dealing with a lot of doctoral thesis clearly. There wasn't much information on Can Themba, and yet this was your doctoral thesis, the biography. How did you go about gathering information on the book?
Yeah, actually, that's how my interest began in Can Themba. That after writing The Suit Continued, I tried to find information because people thought I knew something about Can Themba, and there wasn't a definitive study. There was no biography, and this becomes the first biography more than 55 years after his passing. And basically, what helped me was first to speak to a number of people who had interaction with Can Themba, the likes of Louis Ngosi passed before I could do the research, but the likes of...
but you did talk to Louis at least some time.
Yeah,
and he had written about him.
When I spoke to Louis, I had no intentions of doing a PhD. Actually it was after his passing that I realized that he was the last of the drum writers, and I saw the need to start recording this information about Can Themba. So I spoke to the likes of Nadine Godima, Don Matera, Diorapes Khosisile, and basically one interview led to another, and I did over 20 interviews, his wife was still around at the time, and Themba, and I spoke to her as well, and managed to, through the help of the family, I accessed his school records from the University of Fort Hare, dating as far back as 1944. So with all of that information, I was able to start writing towards his full biography.
Okay. One of the, and you just mentioned Fort Hare, and one of the more interesting things that you talk about is how Ken was treated by the apartheid system regarding his academic records. This man who essentially wanted to be a teacher but paid well for being a teacher. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, Can Themba started teaching in 1948 at Madibani High School, but he was not getting paid fully as a teacher because at the time he had a degree from the University of Fort Hare, where he passed English with a distinction.
Yeah.
But he did not have a teacher's diploma, so he was not getting. He was a
temporary teacher.
Yeah, he was an uncertified teacher. So he went back to Fort Hare, to Rhodes University, but via Fort Hare, because as a black student, he couldn't be
able to
study at Rhodes.
Yeah.
So he was based at Fort Hare while studying at Rhodes, did his university education diploma, but getting the actual certification was a struggle for many years. So eventually, by 1950, the Bantu education was introduced, and so on top of his troubles of not getting paid, when he won the first Drum Short Story Award at Drum Magazine, so they offered him a job, and then he left the teaching position. But what I've learned is that even though he continued working for Drum, but he still wanted to
continue being a teacher.
So he was in correspondence with Fort Hare, Rhodes, UNISA, and the Transvaal Education Department, trying to get his certificate.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that I learned from this particular book. Like, it was very heartbreaking, the way he kept going back and forth and trying to, and of course you allude to it also in the House of Truth quite a bit. Him trying to get this paperwork that will ensure that he becomes a teacher.
Yeah, but at the same time, paperwork couldn't hold him back. This is part of my argument in the book, that beyond everything else, we know Can Themba as a journalist, we know Can Themba as a short story writer, but above all, he was a teacher. You know, he taught in his house at number 111 Ridge Street. He called it the House of Truth.
House of Truth.
So he established it as a platform as a forum for debate, and you know, that's where he had debates, people engaging on different issues. So it was a platform for intellectual engagement. So it's his way of teaching, in a sense, and in the newsroom, he continued to be a teacher. Like, I think someone who captures it very well, in my view, is Joe Tlolwe, whom we know as a legendary journalist. Joe Tlolwe was struggling to break into the journalism world, and you know, his articles kept getting rejected. And at one point, I think this is 1959 or 1960. No, 1959. Can Themba was acting editor for Golden City Post, and then Joe Tlolwe submitted his piece. So instead of rejecting it, Can Themba looked at it, and then told him, "Please change this. The story might be acceptable." And lo and behold, he changed, and the piece was published, and that was his entry into journalism, you know, a career that lasted for over 50 years. And, you know, I spoke to someone like Mayet, for instance, who talked about how Can Themba was patient with him, you know, showing him what to do in the newsroom and all of that. But beyond that, beyond the newsroom, Can Themba was often invited to the University of Pretoria, to Wits,
as a guest lecturer,
and even offered private lessons to students. So even though he could not go back to the classroom in a formal setup, but he continued operating as a teacher, practicing as a teacher.
I mean, we can't talk about Can Themba obviously without talking about that elephant in the room, his alcoholism. And you suggest that part of that had to do with the frustrations that he was suffering under apartheid, you know, obviously not getting his certification as a teacher, and the back and forth with the Transvaal Department of Education. But in addition, he also then had to suffer through, despite his excellence, despite somebody like Anthony Sampson, for instance, who was an editor at Drum, saying that he was a leader and he was pretty much the one who ran things after a certain time, when yet even the Baileys, Jim Bailey doesn't promote him to become editor. Let's talk about that particular injustice.
Yeah, actually, before I get there, just to finish the part of being a teacher, I mean, what is probably less known is that Can Themba taught Desmond Tutu. He taught Casey Motsisi, and whom he took and introduced to journalism, and several others who became...
And alcohol.
We'll get to that. Now, Can Themba, alcohol and the frustrations. First of all, Can Themba, when he joined Drum in 1953, he was a teetotaler, just like me. So, well, it was hard to believe this because, you know, everywhere you go, alcoholism seems to be the most highlighted thing. And on the one hand, how he was introduced to alcoholism, it was a way of bonding a drum, I would say. It was something that was encouraged, endorsed even by the proprietor.
By the higher up.
Yeah, you know. So Can Themba started drinking like everyone else, but at some point there was a certain level of dependency on alcohol. You know, he got to a point of being a fatalist. So you know, if I may put it that way, because he was frustrated in the newsroom now. You know, he started working at drum in 1953, and then within 2 years, he had become the associate editor, meaning the number 2 in the industry,
yes.
in the newspaper. You know, and every time the number 1, the editor leaves, because they were white editors only.
Yeah.
They would bring another one from England.
From England.
And when they arrive here, remember Drum was a magazine targeted at black audiences.
The black audiences.
You know, they covered like beauty queens, witchcraft, boxing matches, and all of that. So they needed someone who knew the living conditions of black people in South Africa. So every time there was a new editor, Can Themba had to teach them about the society that they were here to cover. And, you know, that editor would leave. Like, at first he was there with Anthony Sampson. Sampson left, and then in came Sylvester Stein, and he had to teach Sylvester Stein.
Yeah.
And Sylvester himself says, you know, I would have been nothing without Can Themba, you know. And Sylvester Stein leaves, Can Themba has to be the acting editor, and then another editor comes.
Yeah.
You know, so
Who then fires him?
Yeah, that really weighed him down. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
How did you write such good English when you also had Bantu education?
I was writing about Can Themba.
No, but on a serious note, and I need to come to language. One of the things that Ken grows up in Marabastad, and then he then goes to school, and then he then goes to university in Fort Hare. But the whole thing, the whole idea that Ken, a lot of people that you interviewed say they never heard Ken speaking any of the Black South African languages. And you put it down to him having decided that, well, him and Anne saying that they are detribalized natives, so to speak. Your thoughts on that? I want your independent thoughts, not the Can Themba groupie.
Yeah, first of all, it doesn't make sense to me that he didn't speak any African language. I understand that he loved English, but for someone who grew up in Marabastad, Eskiam Pachel also grew up in Marabastad, was born in Marabastad, and someone who went to school in Sishecho. In Sishecho, where it's predominantly Sepedi. So he'd be exposed to Sesotho languages, all right. And then one of his first poems he wrote while at Fort Hare in 1945, where he lived in a Xhosa-speaking society at Fort Hare. And he met this girl. Obviously there was a language barrier, but he could mumble a few phrases, and that landed him a beautiful Xhosa. So when he needed to speak a language, I think
he actually could.
He actually could, you know, and whilst the community of Sophia Town was cosmopolitan in a sense, and it was predominantly English. after Sofa Town was demolished, Can Themba moved to stay in Soweto at Dube. You know, how do you connect with the neighbors? And then moving to his articles, he always chose some Setswana and Xhosa words, especially. You know, there's an article he writes about the little-known story of women who
were border jumping.
Yeah, you know,
into
in Zeeland, so they were rebelling against the past laws, and then they moved from Zeeland, they jumped the border to Botswana. And he went there to interview these women, and these women were speaking Setswana, you know, and he actually writes and translates some of the Setswana phrases, you know. So in my view, it was just extraordinary for a black person at the time to speak primarily English, you know, as an English graduate. But when there was a need, he did communicate in African languages.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And the view that in their household they spoke English and Afrikaans because they were detribalized. I don't think speaking African languages means you know we are tribalized.
No, but this is the thing. It's like in so many ways he was such an iconoclast, and he was such an independent thinker, and even in spite of the fact that he had with Jean Hart and stuff, the affair and everything, he wasn't this guy who just said yes to whiteness and everything that's Western. So with that particular issue, I found it like, well, no, it doesn't sound like you are this person, and then, you know, but I guess he was a man of many complications, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. You just mentioned the story of Jean Hart. Jean Hart was this British woman who came to South Africa in 1957 to join her husband, Malcolm Hart, whom I had the pleasure of interviewing.
Was he still heartbroken?
No, he wasn't. I had one of the most honest interviews with Malcolm Hart.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. He kept saying to me, I don't care, I'm gonna die anyway.
Okay.
You know, so he was able to talk about his wife's adulterous relationship with Can Themba. You want to know more?
I can't. It's juicy. This is the juice.
Can Themba wrote this story titled Crepuscule.
Crepuscule.
All right, where the narrator called Can Themba is talking about his relationship with a white woman whom he calls Jane in the book. So
for those in the audience, it's in a collection called The Will to Die, which is
Yeah, you see. So it's quite obvious that the Jane in the book is the Jane that we know, you know. But what happened basically, to make the story short, Jean Hart arrived in the country to join her husband, Malcolm, and then a welcome party was organized in Bloke Modesane's home. And then in the party, she meets Can Themba and they fall in love. And they ended up...
And they have a torrid affair.
Yeah, Jean moving out of the apartment.
The apartment and going wherever Ken was.
To stay with Ken. And so this was a scandalous relationship, not only because Jean was a married woman, but also because it flew in the face of the immorality laws. Yeah. So it was a very risky affair. But what is interesting in terms of identity politics is how Ken treats the whole thing, that he takes Jane to a shebeen, and it's all black people, and Jane being his spouse. So he organizes a duke, you know, because women around here have dukes on. So he says by doing so he was Africanizing her. You know,
Yeah, hey. Gene Hart. Anyway, we move. I think I want to ask, I want us to come back to the beginning. And the beginning obviously is not the beginning of this book, but the beginning that led you to have this this interest perhaps in Can Themba. Let's come back to the suit, which is perhaps an area of our mutual convergence. Yeah. Why did you feel that you needed to respond to this beautiful, brilliant short story that is still a timeless classic so many years later?
yeah, I must have been drunk.
Teetotal.
Well, the suit is 60 years old this year, you know, and the fact that whether on stage, the film, and still as a short story, it remains such an appealing story. It speaks to Can Themba's abilities. But anyway, let's move back 21 years ago. I'm a student at Wits doing creative writing. I present a story called, what was it called?
The
Mbumi's Assignment.
Okay.
Right? So in the story, there's a scene where the wife finds an earring in her bedroom. And she confronts the husband saying, whose earring is this?
and he says,
And then he says it's his.
it is. And then now he has
this is
to
a
wear-
dignified man who's a school principal. And then she says, okay, if it's your earring, here it is, put it on as you're going to school. You know? So the story plays around that. And the feedback that I got in class was that the story reminds them of Can Themba's The Suit.
The Suit.
You know? So I took personal offense because I thought
You were being original.
I thought the inspiration was that I plagiarized The Suit, you know. So I read
And then
the
you,
story.
you plagiarized the apology.
So I read The Suit I don't know how many times, you know, but trying to understand this connection, and then I picked it up what it was, you know, and that there was no plagiarism. And in fact, it's an honor to be compared to Can Themba's work. So but after reading The Suit so many times, I had a question. Actually, the depth of The Suit for me is what fascinated me the most, you know. But I had a question that The Suit is about a love triangle, all right. But much as the woman is being punished for committing adultery, the man she had an affair with has been let go scot-free.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, not quite scot-free. He is suitless.
Well, and then what happened with him being suitless? The last we hear of him is that a man clad in a vest and underwear was running down the street. That's the last we hear of him.
Of him in the suit,
You know?
yeah.
So I started reimagining his journey, you know, after jumping out the window, and that imagination for me led me to also trying to expand the significance of the suit, you know, in the sense that I had to say this man was wearing a suit in a township. You know.
Why is he wearing a suit?
So
and a tie?
why is he wearing a suit? So I give him the role of a teacher, you know, and say, okay, now that he's run away, where is he running to? You know, so I gave the suit his house keys, right? Meaning he won't have access to his house.
To his house.
I gave the suit his wallet, meaning he cannot buy his way out of this situation. And lastly, I gave his suit his pass, meaning as a black man in the 50s, you are reduced to nothing without the suit. But also I gave it a sentimental value to say it was his best suit, it was his wedding suit, you know. So with all those elements, that was my way of problematizing the story. On the one hand, creating the need for him to attempt to retrieve the suit, but on the other, developing the character of the suit further.
No, it was honestly, it was very, very inspirational. So inspirational that I did a response to your response and Ken's response, Ken's original. But what I didn't know, hey, until I read this book, was that Kosi wrote her responses before I did mine. I didn't know this.
Yeah, apparently, Kosi wrote Makosa Nakaba. In 2013, she published 2 stories, Behind the Suit and The Suit Continued the Other Side. Basically responding to me. But these 2 responses do not touch on Zukiswa's response, which was published in 2007.
2007, 2008.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2007 actually in Baobab.
2007, yeah. No, not Baobab. Cosmopolitan.
Didn't it go to Baobab first?
It was published by Cosmopolitan first.
Really?
Yes.
Hey, I must have been drunk when I wrote it and drunk when I submitted it. Yes.
Yeah, but so as a result, we have this intergenerational dialogue where I respond to Can Themba, Zukiswa responds to me, and then Kosi responds to me and Can Themba. So you have a generation of writers in dialogue in that sense. And
well, maybe not a generation. You and Makosazana are so much older than I am.
But we write the same period.
Okay, all right. Hey. All right, and you're teaching it to your students. I was fortunate to be a guest lecturer, and it's on Tuesday, and it sparked a lot of like very fascinating conversation.
Yeah, well, it's interesting.
What have been the responses to the original, the suit, for instance? I began to hear that, and then of course all the other responses.
Yeah, well, I joined UJ last year, and I found out that another colleague was teaching the stories. Actually, he didn't include your story.
No, that's because sometimes people don't know good things. It's I.
But anyway, so we have this series of short stories where we have learners or students are doing comparing and contrasting the various versions of the suit, which is quite interesting, and you get heated debates because what these responses do, for instance, the first 2 stories, that is my Can Themba story and my story, are male-centered.
Male-centered.
And the woman at the center of this love triangle, her voice is muffled.
It's muted.
Yeah, so you get now a Zukiswa Wanner who then brings Matilda's voice and in a very provocative manner, and then
that's why I told you I was drunk, man.
And then later, Kosi Kaba, brings the choir element, which I mean, all stories combined always, create a lot of debate. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. Now, I would really like you to read a little something, and I think I want you to read from do you guys want spice?
Yes.
I think let's go to occasions for loving.
Occasions for loving. That's page.
That's 56. Well, it starts on 56, but
You don't have a specific part.
no, actually, I'll let you what you call it.
Okay, I'll keep going.
Take the greatest spice. He's already mentioned this, but I thought you guys might want to hear it.
Or you want me to go straight to?
Themba's most documented relationship, 62.
62.
Yeah.
Okay. Themba's most documented romantic relationship, is an affair he had with Jean Hart, a British emigre who came to South Africa to join her husband, Malcolm Hart, in 1957. Malcolm had arrived in the country earlier that year and was already part of liberal circles in Johannesburg. He struck up a close relationship with Bloke Modisane, who introduced him to his circle of friends and colleagues at Drum magazine. They defiantly went to shebeens and attended racially mixed parties in the township as well as the white suburbs. Upon Jean's arrival, a party to welcome her was organized at Mark Bloke's place in Sophia Town. It was at this party that Jean first laid eyes on Can Themba, and their initial conversation was hardly conducive for romance. Apparently, he walked up to her and declared up front, "Before we begin, just remember there are 12 million of us and 3 million of you, and if we kill one of you and die ourselves, there are still enough of us to carry on. That's what you must remember your position in South Africa." She elaborates in her interview with Mike Nichol. This was a bit heavy, especially from him, because he turned out to be quite the opposite. I fell in love with him and we had an affair eventually. Apart from that introduction though, he turned out to be a most gentle and tolerant and humane person, not a politico at all. Jean's interpretation was that he was saying that they could be jolly and have fun together, but they could never forget the reality of being a black and a white person in a racist South Africa. It was a rather hysterical, over-elaborate way of describing it, but I think that was what the intention was. We can now be friends, but Ken and Jean had one of the most sizzling and dramatic affairs of the 1950s, which became the subject of several books, films, and plays. According to Sylvester Stein, their relationship became a socio-political allegory, reflecting the absurdity of the discriminatory laws of the time. I never did get at the full truth until eventually a total of 4 different books based on that daring story appeared. As it happened, one of them was a novel of my own. The lovers were well aware of the threat posed by the security police and either thought theirs was a worthwhile cause or valued their love for each other more than they feared the prospects of arrest and jail. Apart from the threat posed by the Apartheid Immorality Act, prohibiting romantic and sexual relationships between blacks and whites, as well as the brutality of law enforcement officers who could beat Themba to the end of his wits, there was the little matter of Jean being a married woman. Almost 50 years later, when I asked Mayette, that is to be Mayette, about the affair during our interview, she still felt uncomfortable talking about it, probably because of the element of adultery. Her most expansive comment about what was a well-known relationship was, were suspicions. There were some of us who had inklings of it, but it was his private life, and we felt it wasn't our place to ask questions or to discuss it or anything.
Thank you. Now, here's what's interesting there, and there was the same thing with Ahmed Kathrada as well. You know, Jean Hart says Ken wasn't political. Ahmed Kathrada says Ken wasn't political, but I found Ken was very political in the stories that he wrote, even in his refusal. You know, as much as he loved Jean, his very refusal to go with her to England and say, you know what, I'm gonna stay in this country because this is home, and then eventually, even when he departs and goes to exile in Swaziland. So, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first, Ahmed Kathrada didn't say he wasn't political.
Yeah.
He says he did not know of him as being a member of the
of
ANC.
any political.
Any
Oh,
political party.
yeah. By the way, when you were keen to make him an ANC member.
No, that's what I was told, that he was an underground.
I think we should be grateful that he wasn't. Hello, ANC watchers.
He was an underground ANC operative, you know, but Ahmed Kathrada couldn't confirm that. He said he didn't know. But I think there is a certain level of desperation to make public intellectuals partisan. You know, Can Themba was politically conscious, even though he might not have possessed a membership card of any political party. Actually, many people who possess membership cards of political parties are not political.
Are not political at all.
At all, you know, they get membership cards for expediency, driven by a number of things. But if you look at Can Themba, there's no reason why he wouldn't be politically conscious. For one, he went to study at Fort Hare. And at the time, Fort Hare was a breeding ground for future leaders. All right. But Can Themba was very clear about his talents from when he was a student. I draw parallels, for instance, between him and his fellow Fort Hare student, Robert Sobukwe.
Yeah.
That Can Themba, from the very first year, he published in 2 publications, SENC, which is the South African National Native College, which is a Fort Hare publication, and the Fort Hare. You know, there he published essays, poems, and short stories. And Mangaliso Sobukwe, on the other hand, published in Beware, which was a political pamphlet. So you could see from their student days what these two would become. But fast forward to Can Themba, the journalist. Can Themba was the first person to write about the rise of the Africanists within the ANC.
African National Congress.
You know, saying the ANC is not even aware that there is this movement. You know, part of that reason is that he knew these guys. You know, and
he'd gone to school with Rosette Nzeba, hadn't he? As well.
He was close to
Mangaliso Sobukwe
and the other Robert.
Oh yes,
Robert Mugabe. You know, and when he was a columnist for the Golden City Post, for instance, he wrote a number of articles. You know, why I'm not one of them. Why I'm not a communist.
Why I'm not a communist. But then he gets banned for being a communist.
But first there was a backlash when he stated why I'm not a communist, and he stated why. You know, and there was a backlash. You know, people, some angry that, you know, he says he can't be a communist. And then he wrote another article saying I'm not a fascist either. You know, saying, I mean, showing that not being a communist does not
make you a fascist.
A fascist, you know. But the irony of ironies, but I mean, in these two articles, you see his political insights. So there's no way you can say this person was apolitical. No, that's absolute nonsense. But the irony of things is that having written an article saying this is why I'm not a I'm not a communist, he was banned under the Suppression of Communism
Act. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Right. You and your friends have been called the Rat Pack of South African literature. Who amongst them is most like Can Themba?
I don't know. And by the way, that Rat Pack includes you.
I'm in exile. Government, it doesn't.
No, I think over the years there's been, so many people admired Can Themba, and some wanted to imitate him. And people choose different elements of
what they take
of
him.
Yeah.
And you're working on another drum era writer stuff and everything. What is actually your obsession with this drum era, guys? Why can't you just write my biography now?
No, it's. I think it's organic. The same way that Can Themba happened, because with Can Themba, when I wrote The Suit Continued in 2022, there were so many articles drawing parallels between myself and Can Themba, and I felt an obligation to know something about this man, and hence I did the research. Similarly, Bloke Modisane, most of us know him through his autobiography, Blame on History. But what happened to Bloke beyond 1959, which is where Blame on History ends, And it so happened that while I was traveling in the US doing research, I came across his correspondence with Langston Hughes between 1960 and 1967. They exchanged over 50 letters, and these are very intimate letters that, I could see his life unfolding right before me. And this is back in 2012, and I, since then I did further research, and it has resulted in the play Bloke and His American Bantu. And now we're working towards putting together an edited volume, because this year would have been a Bloke's 100th birthday, his centenary year. And next year, by the way, we will Can Themba's centenary.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And how's that going, actually? Because I've seen the blog stuff. Because I've seen quite a bit of seminars and so forth and so on. How's that? What can we expect?
It's going very well. I'm working with different scholars around the world. There is Siyabonga Njika, who's just finished his PhD on Bloke in Cambridge. So it's really exciting to work with him. But there are scholars like Liz Garner, who's written quite extensively about Bloke on radio. What is at least known in South Africa is that Bloke Modisane worked for the BBC, featured more than 40 times on the BBC. He worked as a dramatist, as a broadcaster himself, and as an actor in some of the plays. But the other aspect that is interesting about Bloke Modisane to me is that while in South Africa he was more well known as a journalist and maybe as a short story writer, he got more established internationally as an actor. He featured in some major blockbusters in the 50s and 60s, produced in the US and in the UK. So you have people writing on those things.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And let's move to you as a playwright. You decided you were going to first there was this short story, you know. Then you moved on to do a novel which you translated yourself, and then you wrote obviously a bunch of short stories. Some are in there, some in another collection. What led you to like, okay, I'm going to start writing plays now? And you've done Can Themba, you know, the House of Truth, and you have done Block and this American Bantu and stuff. And what has led you to go to this field? Have you just like, okay, all right, maybe I'm not like Zukiswa and I can't manage to write a novel anymore, so let me try these other things.
Yeah. Well, first, I've always liked plays. Growing up in Makanda, I had a lot of exposure to the arts in general. So, as I was doing research, I did my PhD while working full-time in government. And you can imagine the toxicity of the combination of government and academia. So one could go mad. So I needed a middle ground. I needed an outlet, you know. So while doing these two, I came across Can Themba's correspondence with Forte in particular, when he was trying to get his diploma, and you could feel a man's pain, you know. One moment they promise that they will send him the certificate, he's excited. The next moment they say, no, we can't send you the certificate, you know. So going through those letters, I could see Can Themba's life unfolding before me, you know. So I sat down and wrote a play, and after having written a play, I needed someone who is experienced with stage acting on the one hand, but on the other, who knows a bit about Can Themba. So I gave the script to Priscillo to read and give me feedback.
Yeah.
And his feedback was that I'd like to act in this.
Okay.
You know, and this is Siphiwo Mahala, someone I grew up watching on TV.
On Generations.
And I, you know, who staged at the Suit, the very first adaptation of the Suit, and won the Best Actor award. You know, so yeah, that's how I wrote my first play, and quite interestingly, I had written before about, you know, growing up in Grahamstown and being in the audience and being my brother and I sticking out like sore thumbs. I said we look like a pair of owls that had blundered into daylight, because we'd be the only two blacks in the audience. And I always told myself that I want to go back to the National Arts Festival and not be on the periphery, but be the festival. So it was a major victory for me to go back and stage the House of Truth as part of the main festival, and among other things, having the show sold out even before the start of the festival.
You bribed people, didn't you, to come to the show? and then Block.
Block, similarly, you need to read the letters to understand what exile meant to people. You know, you have a Block Modesane who arrives in England, has no job, no prospects of work, so he starts reaching out, you know, to people, and for me, those letters showed, on the one hand, how important friendship is. You know, Bloke is stuck in London, and when he feels that no one would understand what he's going through, one person he knew would understand was Hughes. So even though they were separated by the ocean, there's a letter that he later converted into a poem called Lonely. Please look it up, where he says, I know you can hear me, you know. So he writes that I'm going through this pain and I feel like no one can hear my cries. But as I'm here in London, I know you can hear me, you know. So they had that intimate relationship. And to me, it was fascinating that A. Langston Hughes, who was known as the very first black person in the United States of America to take up writing as a full-time job, you know,
So he was essentially me.
would be keen to know,
have this correspondence.
to learn how to speak isiZulu, for instance, that you see these guys gossiping about James Baldwin, you know, talking about Maya Angelou, that we're hanging out with Maya Angelou. These are icons, and to me, I mean, the way they correspond, like they're casual, they're just talking about normal human beings that were here with Miriam Makeba the other day. Louis Ngozi was here with a nice English girl. You know Louis.
Hey. Yes.
You know, just going through that correspondence, to me, I could see their lives unfolding right in front of me. So it belonged to the stage.
Okay, all right.
And we traveled the country, went to Edinburgh, and came back with a 4-star rating.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans of touring on the rest of the continent, or you just want to go to the abroad?
Well, I would like to tour wherever we can go. At some point, we're trying to get the House of Truth to Nigeria, for instance. But the perils of the arts industry, the funding is always the most challenging thing. I think the most natural place to go to for Bloch and his American Bantu would have been to the United States of America, for obvious reasons. One being that the correspondence was with
Langston
Hughes. So this is a story that is about our mutual heritage, you know, on the one hand, but also this year marks 60 years since Bloch Modisane did a tour in the United States, telling them about the situation in South Africa. He had over 20 public engagements, you know, and you'd remember that later that year, Miriam Makeba would address the UN. So his story also shows the importance of or the role of cultural practitioners and intellectuals in the struggle against apartheid. You know, and also the importance of international solidarity, because what you see, this relationship with Langston Hughes went beyond personal. It extended to international solidarity.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wonder, I'm trying to figure out, we have very few minutes left, but I'm trying to see whether you can read a little something more before we get offline. Right. Oh, okay. Actually, maybe before I ask you to do that, when Can is in Swaziland, he then begins to teach. You know, he continues teaching, and so I wonder at the fatalism of his continued drinking at that time when he's doing something now that he loves. Oh, was it already too late at that point in time?
I
and
think
then
it was
coupled
too late.
with the idea of also now having left home and that frustration.
Yeah, I think it was too late. One of the key moments in Can Themba's life, according to the people who knew him, like Louis Ngozi, they say he was broken, really broken when Jean Hart left. You know,
and then she never wrote a letter. Hey!
and she, as soon as she got to England, she forgot about him, and he kept hoping that she would write. You know.
Did she say she forgot about him in the interview with Mike Nico?
No, she doesn't.
Or she was just like nostalgic.
Well,
like,
she just declares her love for him, that she really loved him. And even the husband, by the way, said to me, he felt, I mean, in retrospect,
that she could never love him like she loved Ken.
Yeah, he felt that actually Jean and Ken belong together better than him, the husband. And yeah, you know. So Jean's departure was one of the moments that really broke him, and he was drinking heavily at the time. He got fired from drum in 1959. I mean the situation of him being fired is still contentious.
Well, I found it problematic because what you call it, you know.
I forget his guy.
The editor, what was his name?
For some reason, I keep forgetting his name.
I actually deliberately forget his name personally.
Maybe
it's subconsciously. You're like, I really don't want to know you. Yes.
Yeah, because he had forgotten about his leave. Ken disappeared for a number of days, and it appears that he had asked for leave. But it was clear from the start they wouldn't work together. Because he wanted a boy, and Ken could never have been a boy. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Jean left. He was fired from drum, so he drank heavily. He tried to resist going to exile. So that's why I describe exile as some kind of suicide.
Yeah.
Because going to Swaziland, for him, he had just given up. He had tried everything not to leave South Africa. So him teaching in Swaziland was a little too late. In Swaziland he had his drinking spot. He had his what they called with Pat Mangena the Can Themba corner. So everywhere he went, he had his drinking spot.
All right. Last question. Ken as Mr. Drum. Don't worry. Very last question. It won't take long. And the activism that he did there, and him being chased out in church and all that crazy stuff that happened. Where do you place him as opposed to, Henry Ngumalo when he had that role? Do you think he did it better? Do you think, just very, very briefly, because we're...
no one can be better than Henry Ngumalo as far as Mr. Drum is concerned. But Ken was daring, much more daring than Bloke Modisane, for instance. Yep.
And on that note, thank you very much for watching, everyone who's watching, and please keep watching. This is the 26th time of the writer, and we are coming at you from Durban.